The situation is declining rapidly. We're not a nation that's big enough to do things by ourselves. Calling for a ceasefire is something that Canada has done. I think that members of parliament should reflect what Canadians look like. I'm an immigrant like so many others. We shouldn't be second class and, well, don't complain, why don't you do something about it? Or we can say, if you're different from me, I can learn from you. You know, Canada is stronger because of its diversity. That diversity is something that we should celebrate, but something that has to be worked on all the time, which is, again, one of the things I appreciate about you having this podcast is that you're amplifying people's voices, and that's that we're inviting people to come to Canada. We don't say where you go, we say welcome to Canada.
سعيدي واهلا وسهلا فيكم بحلقه جديده من ببساطه. اليوم حلقتنا مختلفه عن كل السيستم اللي مشينا فيه من الاول. عم نحكي عن نجاحات العرب بسبب الأوضاع اللي عم تصير بلبنان وبفلسطين وبالشرق الأوسط ككل. اليوم قررنا نستضيف نائب بالبرلمان الكندي عن منطقة كيتشنر وكنستوغا، النائب تيم لويس. تيم لويس بلش مولود بأمريكا وانتقل على كندا. هو موسيقي محترف، عنده أكثر من 20 سنة بالموسيقى وسجل عدة ألبومات. ومن الموسيقى انتقل إلى السياسة عام 2019، فائز حاصل على جائزة من السوكان كأفضل مؤلف موسيقي لعام 2002. Tim Lewis, thank you for having us in your office in Kitchener. We're so glad and appreciate having this interview with you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both of you. This is indeed an honor for me, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Let's talk about your switching from music to politics.
Doesn't sound like a common switch, does it? To go from being a professional musician to an elected official to get into politics. It wasn't something that was on my mind, on the radar. I was, a full-time musician since, I started playing piano at 5 years old, and when I got out of school with a degree in music, I became a full-time musician up until when I ran for my first election. So, it was a challenge for me to see if I could run in an election, especially at the federal level in Canada. And what I realized was the skill sets are not as different as people think. I think number one, as an elected official and something that as a jazz musician, as a jazz artist, you have to listen. You have to listen first. And I think that's something that might be missing maybe in politics a little bit more. So listening is important. And also as a jazz musician, there's a lot of cooperation that has to happen. You have to work together to create, to move ahead. And so those skill sets, all of a sudden I realized, there's something that I have been doing. Then the other things, when I thought about it as an elected official, the job itself is precarious. You never know when it's going to end. You never know how long it's going to go. Well, welcome to the music world, or welcome to arts in general. You never know how long things can go. There's a lot of travel, which again, something that I've been used to as a musician, being on the road. So traveling wasn't barred. You spend a lot of time away from your family as an elected official. Again, also in arts, there's a lot of that too. And so the skill sets weren't as different as I thought. And I really think that in Canada, especially at that national level, I think that members of parliament should reflect what Canadians look like. So we need people from all walks of life. We need some more gender parity, like we do in our government's cabinet. We need members of parliament that have experience from all around the world. And I think that's one of the things that makes Canada great. So as opposed to saying I got a degree in political science and work my way up through politics, it's okay to have people that are in trades and arts, teaching, medical profession, anyone stepping in, because we want to make sure that the representation looks and sounds and understands what Canada's like. So in a strange way, looking back, it wasn't, the skill set did match in a way I didn't expect it to. So,
but after 20 years, like almost or more than 2 decades in the music industry, was there any moment, any experience happened that you decided, yes, I want to run for the parliament?
Interesting. Okay. I grew up in the United States.
Yeah.
And I moved up here when I was about mid-20s, let's say. And I left the United States to come to Canada. Full disclosure, it was a woman. I came up to this girl I liked, and now we're married 29 years. So it's strange to leave the New York City music scene to come up to Canada is a little bit backwards for a musician, but she was worth it. But you know what? After I fell in love with her, honestly, I fell in love with Canada as well. There was something about the way Canadians treated each other, the social safety net that existed, the way that people could be themselves. Have that kind of freedom to have their own values, but still neighbors helping neighbors. And I found that existed more in Canada than it did in the United States. There's a bit more of an individuality in the United States, a bit more of a maybe what's in it for me. Whereas in Canada, it seems to be we're going to be doing what's right for our community, what's right for society. We'll help each other out a little bit more. That social safety net happened around the mid-90s, and it was the Liberal government that was in time. And so I think I was fortunate enough that my wife and I were able to start a family, raise a family, and I was able to make a living as a musician, in part because of that social safety net, because of healthcare, because of those kind of situations, because of the opportunities that I received. And so that enabled me to become a musician. And it was around 2011, I think. It was when the Conservatives won that majority government that I felt that there was a bit of polarization, that some of those rights were being challenged. And they talked about old stock Canadians. They talked about people who, immigrated versus were born here. And I thought to myself, I'm an immigrant like so many others. We shouldn't be second class. And there was a bit of pitting against each other. That drove me to want to make a difference. The short story is I was complaining, watching TV and complaining and yelling and saying, this shouldn't happen, this not in Canada, I don't want this to happen. And my wife said to me, well, don't complain, why don't you do something about it? Now, I think she meant write a letter to the editor of the newspaper or do something, but it got me to want to get involved in politics to see if I can make a difference. And maybe it's the creative in me, the artist in me that says, well, I can help out, I can volunteer. I honestly went on Google and I said, how do you run in an election? How do you do it yourself to see what would happen? That's the moment that I decided to make that shift and to see if I can run to try and preserve the values that were here when I came as an immigrant. It is
definitely a big step and a big shift, especially running in the government. People feel like it is a big step.
It was. It absolutely was. It's in baseball they say swinging for the fences, And so starting at that level.
Okay. What were the difficulties you faced during the transition from the creative freedom of music, to the world of politics, and how did you overcome them?
That's a great question. That skill set that I talked about. That's looking in hindsight to see how it was taken. In reality, when one day you put your name forward and fill out paperwork and say, I would like to run as an elected official, I remember going and knocking on doors and saying, I'm Tim Lewis and I'm running for the member of parliament here. And people said, Tim Lewis, I don't know a politician named Tim Lewis. I do know a musician named Tim Lewis. Are you related to him? I'm thinking, well,
it's me.
Yeah, it is. It's me. It was difficult to be taken seriously. Because it sort of came out of nowhere in people's opinions. And if you're on a trajectory and you're working and you're fairly well known in an area for a career and you change careers, it's a challenge for anyone. And that can be a challenge if someone's coming from another country. We discussed that. If you're coming, you take all the skill sets, all of the experience, all the contacts that you have, and you come to a new country and you're starting over and you don't have those same contacts. The experience doesn't mean as much to the people there. So a shift like that from career to career is a small part of that, where all of a sudden it was difficult to let people know, no, I'm in it for the right reasons, and it's the same person that you knew that you saw at that concert.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go a bit and tell you a story. Like, we came from Lebanon, and Lebanon is a very small country, and in Lebanon and most of the third world countries, I think, once a person is elected to be member of parliament, it becomes nearly impossible to reach them. It becomes nearly impossible to set a meeting. So in Canada, we felt the difference. It was, we really appreciate that. Like, it was a phone call. We're going to make a podcast. You are welcoming. We feel like you're a normal person, like you're one of us. How can you define the role of an MP in Canada or around the world? Like, when you are a member of the parliament, what is your role towards the people you represent, or the people who elected you?
That's well, first of all, thank you for that comment. I feel like, yes, who you are before you become elected is who you are after. And the reason you run is amplified. Yeah. If you are someone who runs because they crave power, well, then you get in, you're going to have more power for whatever reason. If you get in because you want to help people, then when you get in, you're able to help more people. And that was one of the things I was able to do. As a musician, I was able to volunteer my services and play at various charities and events and things and try and raise awareness or funds for different causes and some of the great things that happen around in our region. Now I'm able to help at a different level. And that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is that the organizations, the nonprofits, the people that I was able to help before, I can do it at a different level. I can pick up the phone and I can see if I can help more. So that kind of amplification has the responsibility to be, I believe, to be accessible. Yeah. And so maybe in other countries it might not be that case, but in my experience here in Canada, I think the more you're in the community, the more you understand the community. So last weekend I volunteered to flip pancakes for thousands of people at a festival, and later on I'm going to go address 2 different communities, cultural communities, and have those conversations. I think that level of accessibility not only helps me learn more about our community, but it helps me represent, because then you don't have to necessarily schedule an appointment to see at a certain time. It's like, if I'm out in the community and someone wants to talk, then when I come home on weekends, and that happens, once I go back, these are the stories. I'll share this story when I go back on tomorrow night. By Monday, I'll be sharing the story when someone said, "Who did you see over the weekend?" And our conversations become conversations that happen in the hallways in Parliament. I think that's a very approachable way. But yes, there are countries that don't have that. And when people come here, they don't realize how accessible their local elected officials are at any level. I mean, I happen to be at the federal level, but a lot of things affect us at the council level or provincial level. So I hope that everyone realizes how accessible their elected officials are. And then I hope that elected officials keep in mind that your job is to represent, and the best way to do that is to be accessible.
Okay, perfect. And what has been the greatest challenge you have faced as an MP? And how did you resolve it to benefit your community?
I would say probably by far the greatest challenge was the pandemic, was COVID. I had been elected at the end of 2019, so just feeling it out, saying to myself, okay, this is a new career, you've got staff in an office, and not you don't have a band anymore, you've got staff, so it's a little bit different. I can feel this out, we'll see how this works. That's a skill set that I need to learn. And when the pandemic happened, we were all sent home the same as everyone else. So all of a sudden I converted my studio, my basement recording studio, moved equipment around, and it turned into my basement office, where I spent honestly about 18 hours a day on the phone, on Zoom. We managed to govern from our homes the same. Wow. And we needed to provide the supports for Canadians. So it was at first a repatriation, people trying to get home to Canada from all around the world. And so we had the same limitations as everyone else. You've got a phone and a computer, and you're trying to help as many people as possible. That was a challenge. And then after that, to make sure we kept basically a roof over people's heads, food on their table, and their businesses open. So with no playbook, and no matter how much experience other members of Parliament had, more than myself, they didn't have experience in this area. So we were all, someone explained it as, building the airplane while you're flying it. So that was the toughest thing for me, because we also faced the same isolation. You could not then get off the phone and go down the hall and get advice from someone. You were kind of back in your own home. So to get through that pandemic, to make sure people had the safety net that they needed, I would say that has been the most challenging. And that wasn't, on anyone's platform. That those kind of events happen, and it's who you are as a person and the character you have. How do you react to that? So that, looking back, that's hopefully the most challenging that it will be.
I'm going to move a little bit to the arts and culture section.
Sure.
And we know that Canada is praised as one of the most multicultural countries around the world. So what are the steps your party or your role as an MP to ensure the preservation and celebration of the diverse culture in Canada?
That's something that you've heard people say, that, Canada is stronger because of its diversity.
Yeah.
And unless you're an Indigenous, everyone can trace back to being an immigrant, whether it's myself or maybe you coming in first generation or not too long before that. So we've always been able to embrace diversity, but I think that arts is one of those unifiers. I'm going to go tonight, I'll be at 2 different cultural events, and I think you can kind of usually sum it up with the music and the food. Those are the 2 things that I think are easy for people to share. Everyone kind of feels music in their heart and their soul, and it's a way of realizing that we're all the same.
Yeah.
And then also when we're sharing a meal together, it might not be something I've eaten before, but I've had a meal before, and so all of a sudden, those are a bit of icebreakers that we can have. So I think that Canada is a country that supports its own voices, but its voices are changing over time, depending on what countries people are coming from, what cultures they bring, and hopefully we allow everyone to have their own cultures, and then that cross-pollination between is something that we can incubate in Canada, that all of a sudden you see, I've seen Indigenous artists work with East Coast artists, and you've got this cross-pollination, and it usually starts with arts. It usually does. It seems like that's that unifier. So I'm hoping that we can continue that, building on that diversity, and then also support more voices. One of the things that I appreciate about you doing this podcast is that it is challenging to have those kind of diverse voices out in the mainstream, in mainstream arts and mainstream media. But the barriers to having your voice and your stories be told is lower than it used to be. Yeah. So you can do your own podcast, you can do all of that promotion, and you can have a following and get your voices and your ideas and all being shared in a way that you couldn't before. Years ago, there were only certain vehicles you could do that. So I hope we can continue building on that and support that. I know I've had conversations with the Canada Council for the Arts, and they're talking about doing more funding for diversity and reaching out in ways that if it's grant writing, let's say, you don't want someone who is the best at English or French to get the grants because they're better at grant writing. You would like the content to be what's more determined. So I think there's a shift that we're trying to move toward that says we need to have that diverse voices be told, because you can only promote the stories that are being told.
Yes.
Which is, again, one of the things I appreciate about you having this podcast is that you're amplifying people's voices, and that's we need more of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, visible minorities often face challenges in Canada. What programs has the Liberal Party introduced to help improve opportunities and conditions for these groups?
Yeah, it's a challenge more than ever, I think, and it's not just in Canada. It's in the States, it's in Europe, it's all around the world. There's a bit of nationalism that's been kind of creeping in, and I would say since around maybe 2016 or so. There's 2 ways we can go. Everyone can kind of pull back and say, if you're different from me, I suspect you. Or we can say, if you're different from me, I can learn from you.
Yeah.
And I really hope that we can do the latter. That I went to an event, not that it was maybe only a few weeks ago, that had what they called a living library. They had different people from different cultures at a table, and you were encouraged to go up and sit and talk to them, and it was a safer environment. And I could ask questions that I might not be comfortable asking in a different setting, because I didn't want to. A lot of times people want to learn more, but they don't know how to ask about other cultures. They want to ask the question, but they don't want to offend anyone. And in this case, because it was a living library, they said, let's have a conversation. And I asked questions that I was too shy or concerned. I didn't want to offend. I think we need more of that. And I think Canada has the ability, because we are a multinational country, I think we have the ability to continue doing that if we continue to amplify those voices.
I think there is an important point I wanted to talk about. In Canada, we have a lot of cultures, but I still believe a lot of times each culture is still on its own. What we're looking for is sharing those cultures together, mix those culture more. It's not about eating their food or learning what they do. It's about celebrating together their happy moments and our happy moments. That's how I think. So Canada welcomes thousands of refugees. And in your opinion, how does Canada make immigrants feel at home? And what can be improved in the process of helping them integrate into the Canadian society?
That's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. And there's that. There are three streams that people come to Canada. And there are various reasons. Before I get into the streams, some people come because they already have family. They already have friends here. And there's a community here that they can come and know that they'll be part of. Some people come on their own for business opportunities. Some people come for education. They come to study here, whether they stay here and start a business or go back where they were from before and bring those skills back. And some people are leaving where they're from to come to Canada for a better life. So it also depends on why someone's coming to Canada to see how much they want to stay in their own community or how much they're looking to reach out themselves. And then we have those three streams of immigration. One would be the standard stream where people are flying for the paperwork and coming in, and that's what I did. And then you fill it out and you get your working papers and your permanent residence. And then the day you take your test and you become a Canadian citizen. Those are things that, I'm very proud of and people are. And I've got to be now on both sides. I got to take this ceremony myself, and then I got to be at a ceremony for others. And this sense of pride is amazing. And people from all over the world. The second stream would be refugees, would be people that Canada has said, we will take in X amount of people and bring them from countries that need that. And that's working in conjunction with this, organizations, the United Nations, bringing in people here, which Canada has a reputation of doing, of bringing in people, whether it's, recently it's been Ukrainians or before that from people from Syria. We're always a country that's welcoming and letting people in. And then that third stream would be asylum seekers, people that are coming to Canada and saying, I can't go back because I'm persecuted. Those cases have to be kind of on a case-by-case basis to see if people, if that is the case, then we take them in and say, welcome to Canada. But because there's such a varied spectrum of people who are coming because they have a connection or a business or family members here versus someone that left with nothing and then they just came with just the clothes on their back. There's a wide spectrum from how much we can support. So some of the immediate supports would be how can we help people with their basic needs? And then as they become more comfortable or people who are already starting businesses or are students, it's like how can we recognize the skill sets that they bring here? Because if people are coming from all around the world, they're bringing their ideas, they're bringing their businesses, they're bringing their skills. And that's something that makes Canada stronger. And that is also a challenge. If you're coming here and you're not acknowledged for the credentials you have, whether it's a professor or medical or any of those things, we are constantly fighting a bit of protectionism that doesn't recognize people's credentials. You want to make sure that we can also do that. That's an all level of government thing that we have to work, every level has to recognize that. And then there are people who are just coming for a better life that just need those basic needs. So ultimately we have to welcome people, make sure they have the basic needs. And if there are communities that they feel comfortable that they're in, that helps them grow. But if they also want to move somewhere else, we have to make that happen too, because we find that a lot of times if people coming from countries, they're coming into, let's say, the bigger cities. And we've got smaller rural towns that are losing population. Maybe people don't want to come there if their language skills aren't there or what the work experience they bring doesn't apply. So we have to find that right balance. But when we're inviting people to come to Canada, we don't say where you go. We say welcome to Canada. We don't say you have to go to this city or that city. So what we can do as a nation is make sure that they feel more comfortable, whether it's a small town, whether it's a bigger city, whether it's, let's say, closer to Toronto or further up north. We have to try and create that environment as a government that makes them feel comfortable, and then Canadians have to make them feel more comfortable, which would be that sharing of cultures.
That's the thing that happened to me. I lived with my wife in Dubai, and she kept telling me, I miss home, I miss Canada. My wife, she's Canadian, she's a Lebanese Canadian, but she lived most of her life here. And I was like, what is this attachment? Like, why when we're living in Dubai, it's luxury, it's this great lifestyle. She kept telling me I miss home until I moved here. I understood exactly what she mean. Canada is very welcoming. This is my 10th year in Canada, and I can't be prouder of this country. It provided us home, and I'm happy raising my kids in this country.
Yeah, well, that's another one. As myself, as a musician, I had the chance to continue to travel, but I decided to settle here for the same reasons that you said. Yeah. This is a great place to raise a family. We have more work to be done, but that's Canada's always redefining itself.
Okay, we see lots of support for cultural events across Canada. How do you feel Canada can extend the same support for cultural diversity and inclusion in media? For example, through mainstream music, film, arts, all this.
Yeah, right before we went to air, we were talking about an organization that's right here in the community, which is Empty Space, which stands for Multicultural Theater. It's a perfect example, and it was our mutual friend Majdi who passed, who came here and as an artist and tried to get work and wasn't able to do that because, well, his English wasn't as perfect or he didn't fit the certain description, and decided to start his own theater group. Okay. And that group, which is Multicultural Theater Space, allowed more stories to be told, and it's grown organically, and it's one of the kind of jewels of our region here because it's a festival now that attracts people from everywhere and attracts stories from everywhere, and I think we need more of that. We need art that challenges us, and maybe art is a good way to do it because you can have those harder conversations, tell those challenging stories in a way that isn't confrontational. Yeah. It can challenge you to think, but it's not an argument, between two people in a parking lot, having it out. Yeah. This is art as a way of challenging us, and I think that you get more of what you support. So if we and I spoke to the Canada Council for the Arts, and they're really focusing on diversity as far as outreach and funding to make sure that more of those stories can be told. I think that will help people understand each other, and when they understand each other, they realize that we have more in common than we do our differences.
Yeah, I was talking to my brother. He's an actor, and he was telling me it's not enough in Canada to get a foreign actor to act in a movie. You need to get to represent the culture. Mm-hmm. Canada is a multicultural. We want to see those diversity in the shows, on the radio, in theaters. So that's why we were talking about the empty space and the importance of the existence of.
And if it starts in a smaller theater, if it starts on podcasts, if it starts in independent films, that's a good start. But that's just the beginning. It needs to grow. But if you don't allow people some, let's say, seed funding to make their own independent film or their own album, their own play, if that isn't cultivated, then you won't get that next generation. First of all, you won't get younger people saying, I see myself in that actor, I see myself in that artist. And then you won't get them the chance to grow into a bigger production. So I know I just looked at the mandate for Empty Spaces. They refer to as centralized, marginalized voices. Yeah. I had not heard that phrase, but you want to talk about, let's say, marginalized versus how do we centralize those voices? Yeah. And that's a conversation worth having.
Yeah. So how do you feel now the Liberal Party's approach to the culture and communities differs from the Conservative one?
I'm proud that our government has embraced that multiculturalism. Again, it was one of the reasons that I ran. I ran in 2015. I fell short and didn't make it, so then I had to run again in 2019 to be elected. But I think there was a shift. There was a shift from but previous government kind of pitting Canadians against Canadians to an embracing of multiculturalism and saying Canada is stronger because of that. And I think that diversity is something that we should celebrate, but something that has to be worked on all the time. Yeah. Because I do feel, again, since, well, I don't know, 2016, maybe 2020, I'm not sure. Like a couple of years ago, it seems that the world itself is becoming more nationalist and people are a bit afraid of something they don't know. And I'm concerned that we could go in that wrong direction. So we need to support that diversity. We need to support our own stories. And I know as from our governments, like even our own journalists, you know, we have to have those journalists, whether they're independent or whether it's the CBC, we need to support those independent voices that are going to tell our own stories and hold our own governments to account. Because you need that too. That's what you have to have. Artists kind of show a mirror to what society is like. Whether you like what you're seeing, it's a mirror. There it is. And so artists can do that and journalists can do that. So I'm concerned that there's a right-wing movement that's saying journalists are not telling the truth and only we're telling the truth. And, you know, CBC is no good because it's, well, I don't even have the reasons. So I think we need to continue to support those arts, including those diverse voices, and I think we need to support our journalists, again, to tell our stories and to hold everybody accountable.
Yeah.
Okay, how you will continue supporting the art and culture in your political career?
Every day I'll do it. I'll do it every day. I meet with stakeholders at the national level when I'm in Ottawa. I meet with these organizations, the very organizations that I'm part of. Sometimes I've still, you know, as a songwriter, as these organizations that I've been part of. Now all of a sudden they're meeting me in my office, and usually the first 10 minutes of a conversation is for them to explain how important arts is and to explain how big it is for our economy and how challenging it has been in the last few years. And when they meet me, I say, well, you can skip the first 10 minutes because I lived it. I know exactly how you feel and I'm with you 100%. Let's get right to how can I help? Yeah. So I feel like I'm in a position that understands where arts needs to be. And if you think about it, a big part of arts was gathering people together and bringing people together. And through the pandemic, every theater went dark and every stage was shut down. We couldn't bring people together. We had to do it in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so we need to keep that in mind, that we have to support a sector that's one of the slower recovering sectors. It's going to need that continued support so we can continue to tell those stories. So I can make sure I do that in Ottawa, talking to those stakeholders. And then at the local level, you go to those community theaters, you talk to your artists, you go to those concerts. They're all on my contacts in my phone. Yeah. They know they can reach me, and I'm constantly advocating on their behalf. So I think as a government, we recognize now that arts and culture is such a big part of our economy and is a big part of our identity as who we are. If you were to ask someone to name 3 Canadians, I bet 2 of them would be artists. The other might be sports, maybe an athlete. So chances are that's a big part of who we are and who we identify with. So that's something that I will never forget, and I don't think our party forgets either. We have to continue to work on that. So I think we can do better as far as bringing in more people, more diversity, and more support, but we'll stay focused on that.
That's exactly true. The first person I knew in Canada was Randy Bachman. So Canada supports culture. That's definitely, and she's great at it. It's great at it, but it happens, I believe, only in Canada. I'll give you an example. So in countries like my country, let's talk about Lebanon. We have for France, le Centre Culturel Français. We have for Germany, let's say, the Goethe Institute. We have the Instituto Cervantes for Spain. There's nothing about Canada. The only way to reach Canada is through the bureaucracy of the embassy. Yeah. And it's not easy. Do you think, why doesn't Canada have similar centers? And how important is to have a cultural center outside the borders of Canada?
That's interesting. I will look into those organizations, because if best practices is always something, right? So here's an elected official saying, I don't know enough about this. I will learn more. And I like that. I know that Canada has programs that export artists and showcase them around the world, because that's something that we end up doing. We'll have, we'll host different concerts and host people, because I've even applied for some of that grants to see if you can go overseas and sort of be a cultural ambassador. But what you're talking about sounds like it's the next level.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure people would like to know about the indigenous people of Canada outside, would like to know about the Canadian culture, would like to learn about the multicultural of Canada as a multicultural
and
country.
That's a perfect example. And part of that ends up being technology has to help too, because something as simple, and this wouldn't necessarily, you'd think, tie in, but our mission to get broadband across all of Canada, including into remote communities. When I talk to Indigenous artists, they said this can be a game changer, because now we can broadcast, we can have shows, we can set up websites and we can sell our own art, we can tell our stories in ways we couldn't. That's on the digital side, but you're talking about physically having something there.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. So there you go. So this is another benefit of having this podcast.
Okay, so I have a question. Many people ask, where are the human rights against what happened in the Middle East? What is your opinion about this situation?
Yeah, we're seized with that at every level in government, and certainly having that talk as members of Parliament on the world stage. I would say we're deeply concerned about it. The situation is declining rapidly, and what we're seeing is the cycle of attacks and then retaliation, and we need to break that cycle. I think that calling for a ceasefire is something that Canada has done, and more than that ceasefire, we need to work toward a lasting peace. That's something that we agree. Canada as a nation needs to work with more countries and to work with the United Nations. We're not a nation that's big enough to do things by ourselves. But that's one of the soft skills that Canada has as a nation, is that kind of peace broker. So talking to ministers and finding out the discussions we're having behind the scenes and trying to work toward a peaceful solution, a ceasefire, that's ongoing right now.
Yeah.
And so we just have to continue to work together, like as Canada, as other nations, at the United Nations, because we're respected. I think people, when we come to the table and talk, I think people listen a bit more. So I hope we'll continue to use those skills, and at the same time, making sure we're providing aid, making sure we're helping people leave areas that they need to. It's something that we have regular conversations about, and it's not going to be an easy solution, but we're going to continue having those conversations and continue being at the table, especially at that negotiating level.
We always talk about balancing the humanitarian support against the political decisions. So we know Canada is a humanitarian country, but sometimes there's decisions that happen on the political level that is out of... I just want to ask a question outside of the tensions and the conflicts that's happening in the Middle East. In the role of an MP for a specific region, where do people learn about how can they benefit from the MP of the region? How can they meet them? What problems he can solve for them? Is there limits or is there topics that they can't connect with?
Right.
What is the role of an MP?
One of the challenges that we have as far as what services we can provide in different offices are the different levels of government, right? If I'm sitting as a member of Parliament at the federal level, that will be different responsibilities from the provincial level, which is the members of provincial politics, or mayor and council. And so if I'm out discussing something and someone says something about a speed bump that they're looking for, or a garbage pickup that didn't happen, and they say, okay, well, that's municipal, and I'll have my phone out and I'll say, here's your elected official, and reach out to that person and let them know. Healthcare, education, housing, those are primarily provincial issues. Okay. And so there are programs that can help. And at the federal level, a lot of it is immigration, taxes, veterans services. And so But one thing I would say to your viewers and Canadians in general is, if you're not sure, then go where you feel you can go. And if my office as a federal office can help you, I would gladly do that. If it's something that is outside of our jurisdiction, I would say, I can't help you, but here's who can. And we will take that email or that phone, that person, and pass it on. And we do that at different levels of government. We help share. So I would suggest that if anybody needs any help of any kind, they can go to any level of government to ask. And if it's not the correct level of government, that person would direct them where they need to go. But
So since you are on the federal level, you spend all your week in Ottawa.
mostly, yes.
And people can reach out to your website,
Absolutely.
to your email, anytime.
Websites, emails, and then what happens is approximately 1 week a month, they'll call it a constituency week, where the MPs will then spend the whole week in their office. So that's when we're loading up our meetings with our local constituents on that week, which would happen to fall this year with Canadian Thanksgiving.
What advice would you give to newcomers, especially young artists and professionals looking to establish themselves in Canada?
I'm looking at my personal experience. When you come to a new country, I mean, the barriers for me were less because I spoke English, and that wasn't as much of an issue. And culturally, it was quite similar. But what I was missing was the contacts and the references. To say that, so-and-so said I could do this, or I know someone that works in this organization, you're starting over. So I imagine my first thing would be to find people who are already doing what you want to be doing, whatever that is, and talk to them and look for that kind of mentor-mentee relationship, and ask those questions about who can I connect with and who can I talk with. It's important to have those connections, and if you're moving and if you're new here, you have to start over again. And that's the biggest challenge. Yeah. And so if someone has already been there, done that, I think that's the most important thing they can do, because the skills you bring are already there. It's important to let people know that you have those. So I would suggest starting maybe in the community that you know and feel more comfortable with, and saying, who else can I talk to? Who else can I talk to? And then just widen that contact network. And as you do that, I think people will start to realize the skill set that you bring. So I think the contacts is the most important. And then there are organizations that can help. There are artists, the local arts organizations. There are supports. There's Canadian government has some professional development grants that you can apply to. They're not the big grants that say I want to do a big project and make a movie, but there are professional development grants that let you just get your foot in the door and start, and maybe hire someone to help you move along. So you don't have to try and get established right away, but you just need to get those contacts as quickly as possible. I think that would be my biggest sense of advice, and never forget where you came from and what you're bringing to Canada, because you're appreciated.
It's the hardest for artists, and thanks for places like the Empty Space to support and bring artists together. We need more. An Empty Space, by the way, we're gonna have someone from the Empty Space on the coming episodes. Finally, looking back at both your music career and your career as a politician, I'm pretty sure there was amazing moments in both. If you had to pick one, would you say there was more fulfilling moments in your career as a musician or in your career as a politician?
All right. Well, the music career was a lot longer, right? It's been decades that I've been doing that, as opposed to in the elected official is about 5 years now. I would say that the high points for each, this is a great question, the high points for each of those careers are just as validating. If you was able to play I once worked with a symphony and orchestrated all the music and got to hear, a symphony orchestra playing my music while I shared the stage with them. That's one of those kind of things, these high points. Or I play 60,000 people at an event, and these things that just kind of, I call them pinch me moments, where you say that. Those things happen, and in politics, you're able to help someone in a way that you would have otherwise. It's the same feeling, the same satisfaction. Those high points, I would say, are the same for both my music and politics. The difference is, I think in music, the disappointments might be, well, I didn't get a grant, or I was up for an award and I didn't win, or I lost a specific job and some tour got canceled or something. And a lot of, there's hardships there and they're financial, but they never felt as personal.
Yeah.
So I think in politics that the high points are as great as anything I've ever experienced, but those low points, you sort of take it personal. That hate that's out there, that anger toward anyone elected. That's tough to not take personally when you feel like you don't understand where it's coming from, and those. So if the high points are the same, it seems like the low ones could be a little bit lower in the politics. Is that it might not that doesn't necessarily help out.
That's exactly what I thought the answer might be.
No one's ever asked that, so I appreciate it because it's tough to describe. But
do you still have any more questions?
No,
Tim,
thank you.
We're gonna thank you for this. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We're really happy. We are really happy to have you on the federal as a member of the parliament, and we wish you best of luck in your journey, especially in the election coming in 2025.
I appreciate this. It's a pleasure and a privilege to serve people. I'll continue to do it as long as I can, and I appreciate all of that you're doing is amplifying those voices. It's something that's very important here. So I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you. مشاهدينا ومستمعينا، مع كل الأحداث اللي عم تصير بالعالم العربي، بلبنان وبفلسطين وبغزة، نحن المغتربين وجعنا وجعين، لأنه نحن بعاد عنكم مش حدكم، وبنفس الوقت الغربة بشعة. الله يرحم كل الشهداء، والله يحمي لبنان ويحمي بلدنا ويحمي دولنا العربية. نحن منضلنا متمسكين بالأمل مع كل الحزن اللي عم بيصير، الأمل ببناء وطن والأمل بمستقبل أفضل. كل الحب والسلام لكل العرب حول العالم وين ما كنتوا. شكرا لمتابعتكم، بنشوفكم بحلقة جديدة سعيدة.
3, 2, 1 cut.